Welcome to Watches with Dennis, and today I am reviewing the Mr. Jones Watches Ricochet model. This watch is from my personal collection. It was purchased new, and I've owned it for a week at this point. Mr. Jones Watches had the watch designed by Ryan Claytor, a comics creator, and this is the second collaboration between the two. The watch features 50 meters of water resistance, but let's go ahead and get out the calipers, and we will take some measurements. All right, so Mr. Watch claims that the watch diameter is 57 millimeters. So, see what I get. I can line it up right. Get about, a slip. About, what? Yeah, 37. Okay, so I get that. I did not see the thickness of the watch listed on the Mr. Jones website, so I'm getting 11.2 millimeters of thickness. Mr. Watch claims that the Lug To Lug is 18 millimeters. This one's a little tricky to do because maybe I can do it easier on top. The problem is it immediately expands down here, so I'm having a lot of trouble getting it. Okay. Yeah, 18 seems correct. And the watch is listed as, on the website, for once, a site lists Lug To Lug, and they said 46 millimeters, so I'm getting 46.3. All right, so I'm in agreement with a lot of what they've listed there. Looking at the face of this watch, one can see that it is very creative. Mr. Jones Watches lists the watch in their unusual or unconventional section, so it's less about the time telling and it's more about the creativity. The main creative highlight are these three robots on the left-hand side of the dial. Each is gilded in a different metallic foil, and the foil itself not only adds a texture to the robots, but as you can see, it plays quite well with light, resulting in a very eye-catching effect. The depth is further enhanced via the purple background elements, which are behind the robots and the pinball machine. Speaking of the pinball machine, that is where the time-telling feature of the watch is, and obviously it's quite contained, occupying very little space on the overall dial. The hour hand is the hour marker is the left-hand display, and that is actually a jump hour, which means that the hour instantly turns over to the next hour when we reach the appropriate time. And that actually imitates how a score reel functions in conventional electromechanical pinball machines. The minutes hand, which is on the right-hand side of the score display, is not a jump hour. So the dial that shows that time aspect is turning slowly, and the display is actually in 5-minute increments. So the lack of any individual minute markings might frustrate some people, but it's important to remember just how limited the real estate is on a dial in this position. So, and by dial, I mean the dial with a printing on it. So, for example, consider the small print that you would see on a date wheel that would normally be a little bit further out towards the edge of a watch, and just how small that print is when it goes just to the number 1 through 31. We're going to go into more detail on the movement of this watch in a little while, but I do want to denote at this point that the watch movement supports a small seconds feature. However, instead of actually tracking the seconds, what has been done is a disc has been used in this lower section here where the small seconds would normally be, and that disc is spinning around and it creates a very subtle effect. It might be hard to pick up on the camera, where the pop bumper and these two arrow-looking inserts on the pinball machine are clear, and so that disc is moving, and it's supposed to convey an effect to make it look like they're actually flashing like they would when you're playing a pinball game. It's, as I noted, not particularly noticeable. It's really something you have to look for, and I think it serves as a nice Easter egg to pinball fans who would be familiar with that aspect of the game. The watch itself is time only. There are no real complications involved with it. The crystal of the dial is sapphire, and the watch features no lume. The case is highly polished on all sections. The crown is not a screw-down crown, and it only features 2 positions. In position 0, the watch can be wound. And I do need to note that it is difficult for me to grip and wind this crown, given its size and how it's oriented to the case. And position 1, when we pull the crown out, allows the time to be set. So you can see here on the screen the jump hour effect as I roll through quickly the minutes hand feature. The watch itself features a closed case back, and Mr. Jones Watches offered a variety of band options when I ordered this watch, but the default that it was on is the one I went with, which was the gray mesh. This is actually my first mesh band I've ever had for a watch. It's far more comfortable than I was expecting. I find the aspect of hooking, there's this bar, and you hook the clasp into position. The hooking aspect of that I find odd. It's just something I'm not used to. But you then snap and lock it into place. And when it's locked down, it feels quite secure. And I've had no issues at all with it. So it's never popped loose or anything. So it's been very functional. The watch itself features the Seagull ST1721 movement. And I really struggled to find a lot of details about this movement online. I think in part because it seems sometimes the movement's also referred to as the TY2709. Regardless, the movement is a 20 joule movement. It beats at 3 hertz. It's an automatic movement. And as I just showed earlier in the video, it does feature hand winding as well. And the power reserve is listed as being approximately 42 hours. Now, one of the things I'm not clear on is whether the rotor is unidirectional or bidirectional. But what I am clear on is that you can definitely feel that rotor moving. And as others who may have seen my prior review videos know, I am not a fan of rotor wobble or feeling the rotor in any capacity. So this is not the most extreme instance I've experienced. That remains the H31 caliber movement from Hamilton, but it's right up there with Grand Seiko's 9R65 movement, which is a spring drive movement with a very noticeable rotor. And in fact, I would say this rotor is a little more noticeable than that. It's probably the second most notable rotor of any watch I've owned. I did not see any specifications online indicating what the movement's accuracy would be, so let's go ahead and check it out on the time grapher. Okay, so according to this, we're getting about in the dial-up position an 8 seconds per day gain. And I have actually already measured this watch in 5 other positions. So looking at all 6 of those, I get an average of about 4.2 seconds per day gain on this watch movement. And the range of differences I've had were all the way from a -2 seconds per day to this +8 seconds per day that we just saw. And here is a shot of the watch on my 6.75-inch wrist. I think you can see that the dial, even though it's only 37 millimeters, that 46 millimeter lug to lug really comes into play to giving it a lot larger wrist presence than you might otherwise assume this watch would have. Okay, so what are my overall thoughts on this watch? I'd say that the main positives are it is, in my view, a great integration of the pinball theme into a watch. I think that there was an excellent use of foil here for visual effect. The watch movement itself is reasonably accurate, and the watch itself is quite affordable. And I'd say the main negatives are the watch may be a bit small for some folks. It is hard to grip the crown, at least for winding purposes. The rotor movement is quite noticeable, and the watch itself is not ideal for important time-telling functions. I bought this watch direct from Mr. Jones' website for $325. It was limited to 100 units, but the company has a wait list for those interested, and I've read there's already been enough interest expressed that another run of the watch will happen. What I'm not clear on is whether the watch is going to be a permanent piece in the Mr. Jones Watches collection or if it's going to be another limited production. I think you do get a lot of watch for the price point, even setting aside the limited nature of the current run. I was quite surprised at how accurate this movement was We're talking about an automatic watch with a sub $500 price point. So given that none of my measurements came out at a difference of 10 seconds plus or minus per day, I was very impressed. But we know that, based off of everything I've highlighted, that the real reason to own this watch is for the theme and its integration into the timepiece itself. I think the watch diameter will put people off with larger wrists, but as can be seen, and I showed back with my wrist shot element, the lugs go out a lot further than the dial. So I think the wrist presence on this watch is a lot more substantive than the dial diameter conveys. So I think most people find this wears pretty well. As is often the case in my reviews, I have to call out the rotor because it's just too easy to feel, and I don't like that. I know there are some others that actually enjoy that aspect and like to be able to feel the rotor of the watch, but just FYI, it is very noticeable. And finally, I think it's important to note that this is more about the style of the watch and the theme than the substance of time telling. As I discussed, the movement itself is quite accurate, especially for the price point. So it's not that the watch is bad at keeping time, it's just there's a challenge in reading it. Very little of the dial space on the watch face occupied by time-telling elements, so it's just hard to read. The jump hour in particular is because the dial that the time for the hour markers is displayed is even deeper into the watch than the minutes. So I really found in low light conditions, it could be difficult, especially to read the hour marker. And there is no loom to assist in low light situations. So you're just sort of stuck with what you've got. Obviously, 5-minute intervals on the minute reader means that the watch is not ideal for any activity that's going to require more precision in knowing the time. So overall, people should just remember and pursue this watch over the creativity of the design, not a dial being optimized for time telling. Not that you can't tell the time, just be aware it's more whimsical, and so it's going to be more of an estimate just in terms of how it's approached, and obviously we're not using very much of the dial to show the time here. Thanks for watching this review video. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like as it helps the channel out. Subscribe if you'd like to automatically be notified when I release new videos. Thanks for watching and have a great day.